Welcome back, folks. The Independent Line runs a story today about not all Afrikaners are on board with AfriForum and solidarity. Well, we know that to be the case, but for what reason?
The situation has been made worse by US President Donald Trump's misinformed utterances on South Africa's land reform.
According to respected political analyst Professor Amanda Gross, she says that multiple campaigns by lobby groups, AfriForum and Solidarity in the United States, undermine the South African government and will bear negative consequences for South Africa. How so? How can civil rights groups lobbying people in the United States have negative consequences for South Africa if South Africa has done nothing wrong? Amanda Gross is a distinguished professor of political science and holds a PhD from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, back here in the USA. Her fields of specialization are South African politics and gender politics and political behavior. In an interview with Newsroom Africa, University of Stellenbosch academic Gross said that the consequence of Trump's sanctions will affect all South Africans, particularly the poor communities. Well, first off, if she's actually a legitimate political scientist, how can she, in all good conscience and with a straight face, go on a camera and talk about sanctions? There are no sanctions. How can you be a political scientist and not understand what a sanction is? There are no sanctions against South Africa. This is a lie. Once again, the Stellenbosch academic mafia carrying the water for the corrupt government of South Africa. Yeah, this is unbelievable. What sanctions? Please, Ms. Gross, tell us what the sanctions are. I'm curious. What sanctions? Has there been a trade embargo? Have you been graylisted? Have you been kicked out of the SWIFT transaction? Have you had tariffs imposed on you? Have you been kicked out of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act? None of these things have happened. We've simply stopped giving beggars handouts. Now, that may sound harsh, but what other way can we put this? You understand that it's our money, not yours. And in fact, it's not even our money. We don't have it. We borrowed $2 trillion last year. You think it's okay for the United States to burden its grandchildren to take care of your medical needs because you failed to do it? What kind of political scientist runs around and lies like this? She said, I think that the fact that AfriForum went to the United States to speak to President Trump's administration is really deeply undermining the government of South Africa. And it has very serious consequences. It will have implications for all of us. The worst for the poorest of the poor. In that sense, it's really betraying the sovereignty of the South African nation, she said. And of course, what she's doing here is setting up the lie of treason. And it's not betraying the sovereignty of the South African nation. You have got no sanctions for the United States. Stop lying to the world, Stellenbosch academic mafia. Seriously? Unbelievable. This behavior is reprehensible because people will believe this nonsense. First off, AfriForum had nothing to do with Donald Trump's suspension of foreign aid. It was worldwide, you dingbat doorknob. The entire world, there's no foreign aid. He stopped it on January 20th. It has nothing to do with AfriForum. And only after the South African government whined, ooh, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me, we're being picked on, and pissed Trump off, did he issue a tweet. And when they spoke ill of him, then he issued an executive order. AfriForum had never even gone to the States, never even spoken to Donald Trump. Neither had Solidarity. These are pure, unadulterated lies. Using your academic credentials to lie to the public, this is disgraceful. It calls into question all of her published works. What did she say in those published works? Did she tell the truth then? If she's so easily either manipulated or bought and paid for or dishonest for whatever reason? There are no sanctions. They had nothing to do with the suspension of foreign aid. She says, of course, we cannot say certain groups cannot have freedom of speech. What do you mean certain groups? Everybody has freedom of speech. Not really. You have censorship in South Africa, but it's a whole other story. In a democracy, everybody has freedom of speech, but you also have to look at what the limits of that speech are. And when that speech becomes a way of undermining the government, when it becomes hate speech and so on. What hate speech is here? There's no hate speech here. That has nothing to do with this conversation. Do you see this effort to delegitimize the legitimate engagement of two civic rights groups here in America? Shame on you, Professor Gross. What kind of nonsense is this? AfriForum does not represent all white Afrikaners. Who said they did? I think there are white Afrikaners, including myself, that are quite offended by what has happened now and the very serious consequence it has for South Africa.
Well, I think the fact that AfriForum went to the United States to speak to President Trump's administration is really deeply undermining of the current government. And it had very serious consequences. Now funding has been cut off to South Africa, and it will have implications for all of us.
Short of denying groups freedom of speech, there needs to be constructive engagement with these groups where we can work on a political program where everybody can raise the issues they have. Well, first off, you're a political scientist, and you know, if you're a political science, just that the government of South Africa completely ignores the civil society. For the Bella Bill for expropriation without compensation, there were hundreds of thousands, nearly 750,000 or more than 750,000 people who responded from the public. Over 90+% of all those responses were opposing both of those bills. And Ramaphosa signed it anyway. He completely ignored the public. So what constructive engagement are we talking about? They completely ignore these groups and do what they want to do. For a perfunctory purpose, Ramaphosa consulted AfriForum and Solidarity on Bella. And then, like an arrogant asshat, they signed it. There's no engagement here. You have no desire for engagement. Only now when your shorts are down do you run to academics in the Stellenbosch academic mafia to get them to back your positions. Unbelievable. Constructive engagement. And you're offended, Ms. Close. You're offended, Professor. Well, I'm offended at your lies, at your distortions, at your lack of objectivity, of your dishonesty. I'm offended. I'm not an Afrikaner, but I'm a political scientist, and I'm deeply offended by your inability to tell the truth here and your intentional effort to dog whistle and to make unfounded implications against these groups. Now, Jos added that the existence of the government national unity presents greater opportunity for different groups to raise their issues to government. So why go around that, she says. Why do you think you should go straight to the U.S. to get another sovereign country to intervene in the sovereignty of South Africa? I just don't think that's acceptable. Well, first off, that's not what they did. Second off, we've done nothing to intervene in your sovereignty. You're a political scientist. How does the U.S. suspending money that it doesn't have and then offering refuge to people, which affects our country, interfere in your nation? It does not. If we had kicked you out of AGOA, you might make an argument that we kicked you out, but that's our law and we give you access to it and you're illegally involved in it now. You should be kicked out already. If, however, the United States were to impose tariffs on you as a consequence of people visiting here, or if the United States were to impose an embargo on you, then you'd have an argument. But you have no argument here whatsoever, Ms. Close. This is unbelievable. In addition to that, the South African government has failed to even approach the U.S. government. Where is the delegation from Ramaphosa? When does Ramaphosa go to Washington? When does the government of national unity engage the U.S. government? No one is doing it. All you're doing is calling U.S. names and bringing academics from the Stellenbosch academic mafia to lie about South Africans and distort the argument. You know, one thing that Afrikaners are very good at, Ms. Jos, is that's attacking each other, because that's what you're doing. You're being dishonest and you're attacking people. The truth of the matter is AfriForum had nothing to do with the suspension of foreign aid. They had nothing to do with the subsequent executive order on South Africa. And they have nothing to do with anything you're saying. The only thing AfriForum actually did do was what the government has failed to do. They approached the U.S. government through their network of contacts that they've built over decades to ask them to please do not sanction South Africa and please do not kick South Africa out of AGOA. Contrary to undermining the government of national unity, that actually did something for South Africans, something your so-called government of national unity has done jack squat for. While they trot you out and Monyane out to lie about what's going on and to disparage these groups. Frankly, hate speech? There's no hate speech here. The only hatred in this entire conversation is this interview on Newsroom Africa, which is dementedly lying about what's going on and bringing Canadian lawyers who don't know anything about U.S. immigration and Stellenbosch professors to lie about things. Shame on all of you. You people are disgraceful. No objectivity whatsoever. Unbelievable. What say you, South Africa? I just shake my head at this nonsense.